So what other sort of possessions do we have, or objects that we all have our individual gifts and skills, and they're ours because we earn them through our past karma, but we're also sort of a guardian of a power, so to speak. We have sort of we're a custodian of the ability to use a force or to enact something. Do we use those skills for ourself to make the personality bigger and inflated for the ego, or do we use those skills towards sort of as a sense of returning those gifts back to the oneself? If we look at it that way, it changes our motivation, and our expectations from other people are changed in the sense that those powers are shared, and we have practiced, so we have a sort of a part of the overall pool, but it's being constantly exchanged with the rest of humanity. We had to develop those powers through self-conscious attention and development, and they've become an expression, but it's rooted in the universal desire all beings have for self-expression. So if we see other beings as having the same impulses and the same aspirations that we do, then our first impulse is more noble. It's to serve, and when one does that, it tends to be what one receives. That's the law of karma. What goes around comes around. What a man sows, that he shall also reap. If one is focused on, just what is, it's so bad, that's what one is sending out to the astral plane. Those are the impressions that one will receive back. Guess what? It may not get any better. But if one tries to hold a vision of beneficence for oneself or others, and can't reach it all at once, one just keeps taking a step to reach a little closer and a little closer to that vision brought before the imagination of that which we desire on behalf of oneself and behalf of all others. So in this way we serve mankind selflessly, because it's rooted in the self of all. First, we can display it in the family, and ultimately, this idea of sacrifice becomes the bodhisattvic vow on behalf of all beings. It requires us to have a growing recognition of, the just wants and desires of other people, and a concern for them, because we're in this pilgrimage of humanity that we're going through life after life after life, and though we might meet someone on the street as a beggar, in a previous life they may have been our benefactor, and vice versa. So we don't want to look and see how, Judge talks about you can't pull up a plant by its, keep examining the roots to see if it's grown. We just want to release it without attachment to the results. We hope for the best, but we're not going to be like micromanaging or controlling about it. And so voluntary sacrifice, there's a word for it in Sanskrit, tapas, and voluntary sacrifice, it's kind of like the karma yogin, releasing that sacrifice for the benefit of all. It becomes more potent. And yearning to use everything wisely, not just for each other, but for the welfare of the Mahatmas, for our teachers, and for all humanity, could eventually dissolve the barriers of self and other, mine and yours. Another word for universal welfare in the Sanskrit is loka sangraha, and that's the ceaseless celebration of excellence and promise for all. human solidarity and welfare. We're all responsible, not just to ourselves, but to the entire family of man. So to regenerate, to create anew, this might be some ideas to do that. So we'll open it up for questions, have more ideas, but that was the general point. I guess I'll just end with, we've said that there is no such thing as good or bad karma. It's whether it is pleasing or not to the Ishvara within, the divine within. Then good karma, perhaps we could redefine as universal harmony. Thank you. Any thoughts, comments, or questions?
You talked about the heart and the head and the relationship and the head, controlling the head. But you didn't talk about controlling the heart, that I recall. What the relationship and that path going from the head to the heart, what about the other way around? I mean, what's the relationship here between the head and the heart?
Well, that it was being referred to the head as the intellectual, the lower mind, the thought generator, it's sometimes called the monkey mind that plays tricks on us. It's the lower mind, the personality, the ego that is trying to make its claim in the world, maybe to the exclusion of others, perhaps because that tendency was learned or passed down. But the journey to the heart is an inward journey, and the heart, it has that light of the Logos which radiates out in all directions, so it would from within light up the mind, so to speak. This is the analogy the student was trying to get to in talking about the inner, the heart doctrine, the desires of life, of the universe itself, to engage in this cosmic sport, to come into manifestation, to differentiate, to see itself reflected in itself. And how do we as an individual try to integrate that and enact that point of view and all those potentiality, all those possibilities in our life, instead of thinking we're Mr. Brown or who we are in just this one life.
I was thinking that, if the way to treat people, as if they were part of us, is just and to be good to them and not to be selfish, is to keep that perspective of oneness, that we're all one, right? So the problem is that we keep to forget it. So how do we retain that perspective in the midst of normal life when you have to, do your work, compete with with the rest of the world? And how do you? What's the way to maintain that sense of identity, sense of unity, or oneness? So then it will be natural to do what you're saying. But since we live in the world of separation, when everything tries to separate you from the rest of the world, how do you maintain that perspective, sense of unity?
Well, it's not always easy, but any start is a good start. By just beginning with the desire to go in that direction, to, as given an example, to imagine one's needs being fulfilled, one's deepest aspirations, and of another person. If one is in exchange in the office with another person, that one is that other is oneself, and one is joyously giving to the other. That doesn't mean that there can't be relative competition, because competition isn't wholly bad. Competition pushes everyone to do their best sometimes in the absence of a desire to do one's best. It's sort of maybe an artificial boost to get people to maybe express or dig down to their gifts and their energies to see what they can express, because we're not always aware of them until they're put to the test. So it's not that that competition is wrong. It can be done in a playful kind of way, in like the idea of cosmic sport, in the way that it's just a game, but we're all still friends behind it all, that no one's going to do anything at the expense of the other. And paying attention to that. Another example that the student read about was every night before one goes to sleep, to remember all the beings one interacted with and who one gained benefit from, and to remember them in a positive way, or to extend benefit in some mental or emotional or heartfelt way towards others that you interacted with, or that you come to mind that you didn't get a chance, or are in a difficult situation. So there's countless examples, setting aside time to think of others. It's difficult to do because this physical reality and the ego is just so ever present that lower energy is always trying to assert itself. So it's definitely easier said than done. But to try to always return to that idea that self-satisfaction is a natural result of doing good, and other people, extending that, sharing it, being creative about it, enjoying imagining everyone living up to their fullest potential. What could that mean? Yes. Any ideas? Anybody else want to add?
There is a very good article, I think it's HPD's, where she compares the attributes of the lower to the higher. And she says that the lower mind tends towards dispersion, and the higher mind towards synthesis. And that, this is I think your question, that if your thought, speech or activity cannot benefit in a very small, minute way the other, not to do it. That is also easier said than done, but it's a gauge. For instance, you're fixing dinner. What's the attitude of the mind? Just like you said, are you happy about it? Are you doing it in cheerfulness, that you're happy to be involved in that activity? It's a very simple activity, but when you remember how much effort has gone into growing it, and here imagination comes into it. When you're cleaning your vegetables, do you see your mind in the field where those vegetables were grown, and are you grateful for all that activity that took place before it actually came to your table? And that is a good way to use your imagination also to send thanks to all of the lives that are within the entity, which is your vegetable, the person who grew it, and from there it had to come all the way to your market for you to go get it from, and whoever earned the income, because you also mentioned money. There is all these aspects that we use in our lives. They're very small, but when you add them all together, it constitutes our lives. So if your activity is joyful, expansive, for the good of fixing a meal is for the good of the family, then it fulfills all those ideals that the article talked about. But if you're doing it just for yourself, and it is based in egoity and selfishness, then it is going towards dispersion, not unity. And that can be the game.